Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. I'm Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting, and I'm delighted to have you and to welcome our guest today, Sarah Lightfoot. Sarah Lightfoot is a colleague, a friend, and kind of one of the wisest people I know and have had the good fortune of knowing, who has really contributed a lot of value to client work that she and I have done together, but also a real firm understanding of what it takes to bring out the best in people. So I'm gonna introduce Sarah a little bit more, but before we get started, I just wanted to say welcome, Sarah. So excited to have you here.
So glad to be here, Danny.
Yeah,
Since and I have worked on so many projects and known each other for so long, it just feels right that
yeah.
I get to be one of your first guests. I'm so
Ah,
proud.
it
And I'm
does feel
honored
right.
to be asked.
It does feel right, and we are the ones who are honored to have you here. So let me tell our listeners a little bit about you. So Sarah Lightfoot works with nonprofits, government, and small companies to create adaptive and agile work systems that create value and enhance the social systems of work that bind us as humans. While she didn't know it at the time, she first learned adaptive leadership as a community organizer from, quote, ordinary neighborhood leaders, unquote, who schooled her in strategy and building value centered relationships. After a successful career in nonprofit fund development, Sarah now brings adaptive leadership to large city granting programs, startup and established nonprofits, and small companies and B Corps. Her pandemic hobbies now include jazz, improv singing, and solo backpacking. And I have to say, Sarah, I just read your bio, but I'm a little bit awestruck and surprised and delighted to hear about your pandemic hobby of jazz improv singing.
Yes, yes. I needed something easy to do in the arts because I just wanted to have more creative expression. And I found this app, Danny, called Scatability.
Ah,
And this app has jazz singers recording specific phrases for you to sing back to them.
oh,
So
fun.
it's a kind of call and response, and it's a way of learning scat jazz singing, a la Ella Fitzgerald, who was one of the first pioneers of the genre and is a master. Um, so yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun and feeling kind of jazzy.
Right on, yeah. Ba-da-da-doo-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba. Yeah, awesome,
Yeah.
awesome, love it. And it also occurs to me that our listeners, who are primarily middle managers in the core of an organization, and just as a reminder for you and for everybody listening, we call our middle managers the core of an organization, akin to a
Hmm.
human body, right? A human body. We work on
Yes.
our legs, we can work on our arms, but if we're not working on our core, nothing else matters. So this podcast exists to support the core middle managers for all organizations, knowing that middle managers have as much, if not more, responsibility than folks in the executive level in a lot of ways. And they're also caught between a rock and a hard place. But I'm also struck by the analogy that they're also like jazz musicians trying to
Mhm.
create something out of nothing, to blend and harmonize in ways that are a little bit outside of the ordinary, and to be innovators in a lot of ways. And I think that speaks to actually the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is the work that you have done and continue to do with something called Agile. Can you tell us a little bit about Agile and then maybe how you see how it might relate to our middle managers?
Yes. So Agile is a set of mindsets, methodologies, and practices and values that support good work. And it came about actually from a group that is similar to your audience. So it came about because there were a group of engineers in an organization that were tasked with building things for customers, right? And so that was their specialized function. And they found that getting work done was really tough.
Mm-hmm.
They would be tasked with what customers wanted, the interpretation of what customers wanted, right? And Then they were supposed to go off and build it, but there was oftentimes communication difficulties translating what customers wanted. And then you'd roll it out, and then you'd realize, wait, that's not what the customers wanted at all. Or, you'd roll it out, and the executives would say, wait a second, that's not what we asked for. And then you go back to the requirements and you say, but yes, it is. And, many of the typical things that can come up in organizations. So they went and they decided, we're going to seize our own leadership agency, and we are going to have a summit, and we're going to think about this problem and what are the ways that we can punch through.
Huh.
So they came up with something called the Agile Manifesto.
Huh.
And this now has morphed into many related practices. And but at its core, there are four things that they came up with: valuing individuals and interactions over processes and tools, valuing working software over comprehensive documentation, which means let's build something. Let's just
Mhm.
not talk about building it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Three is valuing customer collaboration over contract negotiation.
Mhm. Mhm.
And four is valuing responding to change over following a plan.
Mhm. I love that.
And so they built a number of practices around this. And when I think about what is valuable to middle managers around this, I would advise, really asking what is what are your biggest pain points, right? What are your biggest challenges? And then how do these actually fit in to solving that problem? What
Huh.
what is getting in the way of being
Mhm.
great? And what of the agile principles can support us? And whether it's customer centricity, collaboration across different silos, or openness to change, really, if you've identified one of those, then you can start to say, okay, what do we do about this?
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
that's how I think starting with that is really important, because
Well, it's
sometimes people talk about frameworks, right? Let's just apply this framework, and you have to really get into the why. Go ahead, Danny.
no, and it's the framework I think that's really speaking to me in a large way, right? Is this depend so, the idea of relationships trumping what is one of the
Processes and kind of
exactly,
the checklist,
exactly. And
yes.
contract and the idea of change and innovation and working. I mean, all the principles really, I think, hold true for what our middle managers are trying to do. Which, as you and I were just discussing, most folks even in the middle of an organization have their own fiefdom. They have some ability to impact and influence a certain number of people, a process, a thing, a policy. And so, in that, I think Agile becomes really useful, as you said, as a framework to start thinking about how to, if not solve the problem, at least attempt to create something that's moving towards a solution. Am I getting that right?
Yes, yes. And, some examples, for you is, if your biggest problem is this feeling of a lack of customer centricity, right? So
Uh-huh.
perhaps in your department, you are quite isolated from customers, and therefore it can be really difficult for people to feel connected to the product they're building, and or to be able to be responsive to the customers in real time. Just an example is that one company had every single person do chat duty
Uh-huh. Huh. Huh.
once a week or once every 2 weeks. And that way everyone has the ethos of like, what is what is the pain point of the customer,
Huh.
right? And it made actually it easier for silos across the company to really get behind
Hmm.
being customer centered, because folks had to were on the ground really feeling the pain of those customers,
Hmm.
wanting to help them, and then realizing, oh, we need something different here. And because they felt that connection to the customer through that practice, they were able to be quite responsive to their colleagues focused on problems, and
Huh.
work together.
So,
I
and
have a
then,
couple more examples too, but
yeah,
go ahead. What's
yeah.
your reaction
I
or thoughts?
It's the same. Yeah, I believe it's the same thing, right? So, our middle managers are concerned about their customers, their clients, whether they're internal or external, same kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm hoping maybe we'll even have time that we can go back and forth on a particular issue, and maybe you can just tell me. I think an issue that's really endemic to middle managers, and maybe we can go back and forth on how to apply those values and principles.
Awesome. I love it.
But tell Sarah, before we get to that, maybe a little bit. I know it's been really important for you. How has Agile transformed or helped you in the work that you're doing, trying to change the world and build up communities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, when I think about those three tenets of customer centricity, collaboration, and openness to change, for myself as a consultant, I am pushing myself to have approach my work a little bit differently instead of feeling like I need to come in and have the right answer to a problem,
Mm.
right, that a client
Mhm.
has.
Mhm.
I am trying to test in cycles of collaboration with a client
Mhm.
while bringing in their customers' perspectives. So, what does that look like? Recently, I worked with a company that was struggling with hiring. I know that many of us are struggling with that right now. They were a service company and they needed good people on the front lines to build some things, and we moved into action quickly to make changes, but we were really tuned into the blocks of collaboration. There were blocks to actually collaborating. Turns out that one of the biggest blocks was the folks who were doing the interviews were also in the field, and they didn't see it as part of their real job that they
Yeah.
were evaluated for,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So inside it was kind of built like there's HR and then there's, customer delivery service. But really HR needed to collaborate with these people on the ground, the managers, to hire these people. But it had really gotten siloed. So, through bringing the whole system in the room, we were able to diagnose the problem together, right? Rather than me coming in and analyzing things, right? And the leaders and the managers, who felt interrupted in the field, HR, we came up with a minimal viable product of fast track hiring, right? So that the managers, we troubleshooted the managers, situation, and now we're deploying it, right? Then we're talking to the people that were hired and the people that were not hired, if they'll talk to us, about what worked and what didn't. And then together we're upgrading what that process is.
Huh. So,
So
yeah.
yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's not only collaboration with. So if it were me, if I was working with you, it's not only my collaboration with you and my colleagues, it's actually collaboration with the end user as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
customer centricity part coming together
yep,
with the collaboration, also coming together with the adaptation to change. Because if you listen to the customers, you're more likely to realize, okay, well, we just got to fix it,
yeah,
rather than arguing about the customer as or some abstract idea.
right. So, so, all right. So I'd like to see if we can go through a kind of a real life example for this, and you tell me,
Sure,
because I want our listeners to be able to apply these principles on their own without necessarily. I mean, by all means, if they can bring in an external consultant, but most of my
sure.
managers aren't able to do
But
that.
you don't have to all the time, right?
Okay,
Like,
that's what I want to
yeah,
hear. So let's say I am I have a let's say I have a team of 15 people. They are exhausted, they are overwhelmed, they are what the pandemic seems to be producing, which is, folks that are not always engaged, perhaps, disinterested, all those kind of. So if I'm working on a culture shift, what might be some
mhm.
how might we approach this through an agile lens?
Sure. I really love that question. So if we're being customer centric, the customers you're talking about are the people on your team, right? They're the ones who are hurting, who are having these problems. And you're talking about a wicked problem that all of us are facing with burnout
Exactly.
and some other things that are coming up. Um, a lot a lot of times, what one block to that might be collaboration, because HR.
Right.
right? And then also openness for change. And so this sense of how do we do things differently? So what I would do is really kick off a meeting in which, we're really open about how people are feeling and
Mm.
identify
Mhm.
this as a problem and be
Okay.
open about it, and then collaborate and brainstorm what are, come up with maybe there's a budget perhaps, or some sort of parameter in terms of paid leave that you could broker with HR, and you can come in and kind of say, this is the parameters that we have. Let's create something, folks, and let's experiment, right?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And so, what is really important is, you look at those principles and values, those three principles and values, and have a trial period for
Mm.
the practice. Don't say, this is it, we've come up with the answers, folks, because good luck, right? This is the most wicked problem we're facing right now, is people being burned out. And then have step back time to reflect what worked well, what could go even better. Don't defend, iterate, and make improvements together. Talk about what really worked, and let's keep doing that. And the things that didn't work, let's throw them away. And then
Yeah.
what's the next trial cycle?
I think that's gold. I think that is gold, and I think that's where middle managers often get wrapped around the axle. Is I've got to, I'll do all the due diligence to figure out what the problem is, get the solution, and then, you know, bet everything I got on that solution. And what I love about Agile is that it says, no, this is iterative in some way. So we want to put it out there, we want to experiment, then we want to get feedback on it. We want to tweak and then we want to do it again, right? I mean, to do it
Yes,
again and to keep
exactly.
so it becomes this
Exactly.
feedback loop that I think is really, really powerful, really powerful.
Hmm.
Right on. Okay, great. So, and Sarah, I'm just curious: is there, is there any other story that you can share with us that would show the power of Agile?
Sure. So I am working now on strategic planning right now, which is and how to create an adaptive operating system
Nice.
for strategy. Because exactly what you say, you can't just go off and solve this problem by yourself. Besides, if you put plans in place, everything's going to change anyway. We're dealing with a world of complexity in which, if we measure our success by, plans checked off, we're not going to get there, right? We're not going to get there. We have to keep listening to the most important stakeholders. We've got to keep iterating on where we put our resources and priorities. So, I am working to, with leaders to reinvent what strategic planning is. It is actually practices where we keep iterating about where do we put our most of our resources, right? And
Mhm,
why?
mhm.
I mean, certainly you have all the things that you usually have, which are around vision, where you're going, your direction, and, your values. But inside of that, the priorities are going to have to shift over time. And so, how do you put in an operating system where you are trying things out, right? And then you're giving yourself permission to be wrong. Step
Yes.
back together and say, okay, we tried that. Now, is it working? Should we be shifting these resources? So, things like on a quarterly basis, doing the step back and saying, are we putting resources where there is the biggest, most juice for the squeeze in
Mhm,
terms of
mhm.
what are how our best or how our customers are impacted. So, having measurements in place about how our stakeholders are doing, right? Our most important stakeholders, our customers, our employees, right? And noticing, okay, where that can change over time, right? So we want to be able to adjust and not feel like, well, we said we were going to do this plan and now let's all go on a death march.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's create that space to for actually people can say the truth, like, folks, we're on a death march, this
Mhm,
really doesn't make any sense. You
mhm.
have to have, some clear decision makers, and not everybody's going to be happy with it, but you are creating the norm where productive conflict is normal to
Yes.
try to
Yes.
experiment.
Love it. Love it. So much in there. So much in there. Well, we're coming close to time. And so I do want to finish up with the questions that I always ask my guests. And that is, can you, what is the first thing that listeners should do as soon as they get off this podcast to perhaps get this moving, right? If they want to apply or learn.
Yeah. Well, there's a
Secondly,
gr
yeah,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh,
Well,
there's a great article, from, HBR, Harvard Business Review, which you'll put in the show notes. That's a good one. And then just ask yourself, which is it that I really need to solve? Is it customer centricity? Is it collaboration? Is it openness to change?
love it. Love it.
And ask yourself and journal on that question. And
Mhm.
then, read that article. And then the final book that I'll talk about is Agile for Everybody,
Hmm.
by Matt LeMay, is just wonderful because he really takes it from the perspective of anyone, including middle managers, about how they can use these principles to make a difference.
Right on. So not just software developers, but
Right,
the common person, middle managers, and everybody else. That there are
right.
principles. Excellent, excellent. Really appreciate that, and you gave us some first steps. What's the name of the article? The HBR article? You
The
know that?
HBR article is why you should be doing sprints. I think
Okay,
is, yeah.
because sprints are
Oh,
part
oh,
of Agile, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, here's the real title. Sprints are the secret to getting more done.
Okay.
That's the name of the article.
Okay, so listeners, make sure you check out the show notes that will give a direct link to that article. It sounds like a great article. And then lastly, Sarah, can you tell us what's the best way that folks can get in touch with you or stay in your orbit or hear some more about Agile from you?
Sure. I am on LinkedIn, Sarah Lightfoot, and I'm also at sarah@keyringconsulting.com. And I'm also on Instagram under Lightfoot Sarah.
There you go.
So I would love to stay in touch with you, and I always try to post content that's relevant.
Right on. Awesome. Love that. And is there anything else, Sarah, that you want to leave us with?
I just want to say that I have so much respect for leaders that are trying to make work better for people and are dedicated to improving themselves. And, if you're here, you're that person, and I see you and I
Yeah,
appreciate you. And
that's awesome.
thanks, Danny, for providing this forum.
You bet. You bet. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, listeners. We'll see you next time on our next episode of the Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you.